You mentioned oil and gas development on public lands, and this is quite controversial because on the one hand you're preserving the habitat, on the other hand you are charged with minerals management too on the same ground. Some have criticized the administration for pushing forward with oil shale development, which people feel is very intrusive, some people do, to the environment, and also that the fuel itself takes a lot of energy and water to get to, and that it's actually not that clean. But you have moved ahead with an oil shale program.
Yes.
Do you feel that's important?
I do. It is another source of energy development so that we do not have to rely upon foreign entities to provide us with our energy. For the United States to say that we have energy shortages, and therefore we say to others, you need to provide additional energy. Now, part of it has to be conservation, part of it has to be alternative energy sources, which, if you wish, we can talk about. But specifically to oil shale, we have different pilot projects that are out there to determine, is it feasible? If so, how much energy does it take? Is it a net gain? But the actual oil shale reserves, some 800 billion gallons or barrels, is 3 times the reserves of Saudi Arabia. It's an enormous resource. It is incumbent upon us to determine what is the technology that would be necessary and required to derive the resource from that, but to always do it in the most environmentally sensitive fashion.
These oil and gas issues have to be some of the most controversial that you're dealing with. Again, continental shelf drilling, Congress has had a ban on that. You've gone ahead and jump-started a new oil and natural gas leasing program for that shelf.
Yes.
Several of the things that you've done are not necessarily what Congress has wanted. Again, you feel it's important to start investigating that area.
Oh yes. It's estimated that approximately 80% of the reserves in the Outer Continental Shelf have been off limits through both the moratorium by Congress, but also by the executive order of the President. The President then withdrew his executive ban. We worked with Congress. They then withdrew their moratorium. So yes, I have accelerated the next 5-year oil and gas leasing program. I will not be able to complete it on my watch. But by doing and taking the actions I have, it accelerates by 2 years so that those resources can be available, but it will leave the maximum extent flexibility to the next administration.
The next administration, I don't know what President-elect Obama, I don't know that he's come out on oil shale, but he is opposed to continental shelf drilling. How disappointed would you be to see these programs you started in the oil and gas arena stopped by the next administration?
I don't think you'd see them stop. And I'm not sure that he's taken a flat position in opposition to this. We have some 4,000 oil and gas platforms that are out there in the Gulf of Mexico that were in the direct line of the Katrina and Rita hurricanes. They were shut down. All of the safety mechanisms below the surface worked. No loss of life. The United States has the resources. We have the technology, and so it does need to be part of the portfolio.
I want to talk about some of the specific species that you've been working on. One is polar bear, and certainly one of the more covered events of your administration was your announcement of the listing of the polar bear as a threatened species, not endangered yet, but threatened. And some were confused when they read your speech on this issue, because on the one hand you were saying that the decrease in ice, its habitat, is the reason for listing, and on the other hand you were saying that you don't want this listing to be used in any way to affect climate change. In other words, by lawsuits that might deny specific oil and gas facilities that contribute to global warming. And so people are wondering, what protection does the bear really have based on your designation if global climate change cannot be considered?
Right. I don't think they're confused. I think that there are those that hoped that the listing of the polar bear because of the fact, as you pointed out, that the sea ice is melting, that then would allow for a loophole, a backdoor opportunity to regulate greenhouse gases. And I made it very clear the day that I made my announcement that it cannot be used as that. If in fact the Endangered Species Act became the vehicle to regulate greenhouse gases, you would have a bureaucracy that would be setting some dramatic policies. That should be left to the executive and to Congress to have an open, transparent discussion about climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, what do you do about them, instead of having a law that was written in 1973 when there was no discussion about climate change, and that is to be focused upon the species. When I listed that species, the polar bear, and if you'd like, I mean, we'll go into detail
No, we
how
don't
it
have
came
that much
about.
time. I want to ask you a little bit more about climate change.
But when I listed that, many people cheered because they honestly, sincerely wanted to see the protection of the bear. But there were also those that cheered, having nothing to do with the bear, thinking, aha, we now have a loophole so that we can now regulate greenhouse gases. I said at the time it is not the right tool to use for that. The New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, all editorialized and agreed that it is not the proper tool.
So the only way then that the bear habitat might be protected is a more global program to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
We're looking at a variety of things. I mean, Fish and Wildlife, working on this, and the different distinct populations, what are they doing during migration, et cetera. But no question, we're experiencing climate change. And the loss of that sea ice has had a dramatic effect.
So, but you don't feel that individual projects in the polar bear habitat should be denied on the basis of the fact that they contribute to global warming?
No,
Okay.
for this reason. You cannot, through science, state that an activity in the lower 48 somehow is having a direct effect upon a specific bear up in Alaska. You cannot make that causal connection. It's not possible.
Now you went further. You made a change to the Endangered Species Act to specifically exclude climate change from the factors that trigger what's called an interagency consultation, where scientists from different agencies consult with each other on a project. So you really, before you leave, this seems like it's a very important thing for you to make sure that climate change is not added in as a factor in the Endangered Species Act.
You know, I have a long history of working on the Endangered Species Act. I think it needs improvement. When I was a U.S. Senator, I had reform of the Endangered Species Act that had the support of bipartisan support, including Harry Reid. It came out of committee. The new rule that we have put in place, and yes, it is necessary, it does deal with Section 7, consultation, but it does not preclude any action agency that if it determines it still wishes to consult with Fish and Wildlife or the National Marine Fisheries Service, it may do so, because we made no changes to Section 9, which says that that action agency is still accountable, either through criminal charges or through civil charges for the protection of the species. They're not going to jeopardize that.
We're talking about Endangered Species Act here. I don't want to get too arcane, but one of the rule changes that you have affected in the last couple of weeks here, it has to do with what's called Section 7, this consultation part that we're talking about. And some people are calling it a gutting of the Endangered Species Act, that you have removed the provision that requires an agency, say the National Park Service wants to build a bridge through a river that might disturb fish or something. They used to have to consult with the relevant U.S. Fish and Wildlife or National Marine Fisheries Service. You have removed that, and some people say that that's terrible for the Endangered Species Act to remove that consultation.
Of course they say that. Of course they say it's gutting the act. Anytime you make suggested changes to the Endangered Species Act, people, the critics say you're gutting it. They said that in the Senate.